My name is Mark, and in this chapter, we are going to get very practical and we'll actually break down the whole cycle of Ton smart contract development. We'll go through each step of it together, and as the end result, we would have a ready-made custom local setup for smart contract development, a written fancy code of the contract, tests that are going to test our contract, and an actual deployed contract. Let's get straight to the point. The best allegory that I was able to come up with to explain the life cycle of the Ton smart contract development is following. You could think of a Ton contract as a satellite that is launched to the orbit of the Earth, and the satellite is flying around the Earth, interacting with other satellites. It's able to accept information from the Earth, process it, and send some results. But before we actually launch it to the space, there's a few stages it has to go through. There's a base laboratory where it is getting assembled. So it's kind of a local setup on your computer. There's a certain documented protocol that defines all possible commands that could be processed by our satellite, aka TLB scheme, that you're going to learn about after. Each of the behavior scenarios are tested while the satellite is still being in laboratory, your local tests. After that, it's put into a simulated environment, very similar to what is awaiting for it in space. This is allowing us to test one more time the expected behavior in response to predefined commands, as well as interactions with other subjects in space and on the Earth. This is testnet and after deploy on-chain tests. So how do we deliver the satellite to the orbit? Using rockets. Rockets are bringing the satellite to the orbit and leave it there. They're falling off after the successful finish of their mission. So this is mainnet production deployment. From this moment, the satellite is on its own in the space, working with everything it has pre-programmed inside. When we are writing a smart contract, we are using a similar cycle. So first stage, we prepare our local setup that will enable us to bring our satellite smart contract through every stage mentioned above. The first key part of our local setup will be compiler. The actual smart contract on Ton blockchain is stored and executed as a binary code. But we want to program logic with something more understandable for human. So the language we are using to program Ton contract is called fancy. The path between fancy and bytecode is following. So fancy is compiled into fifth assembly code, which generates corresponding bytecode for the Ton virtual machine, the space. If we reference to our satellite example, TVM is a space. So for us, the essence of the fifth assembler code is not very important, and we will treat it just as under the hood intermediary state of our smart contract code, and we give this away to our compiler. At this moment, the best and mainstream way to operate the compiler is using TypeScript language. So TypeScript has nothing to do with actual Ton virtual machine. Think of it as something that stays on the Earth once satellite is launched. The compiler we are going to use is fancy.js. So internally, this package is using both fancy compiler and fifth interpreter, and they're combined into a single library that is using WebAssembly under the hood. Second stage, we use TLB schema to describe the commands that our smart contract is able to process. So TLB stands for type language binary. It serves to describe the type system, constructors, and existing functions that are on contract. And you can see now the example of TLB document. Third stage is the sweetest part. We write fancy code. Fancy is a domain-specific, C-like, statically typed language. And in this lesson, we are going to actually write some logic with fancy code. The fourth stage is that we test our fancy code behavior locally. So we are using TypeScript to write test logic. On this step, we are simulating TVM machine locally. We send data into the simulated contract. We analyze the output. We are repeating that until we get desired results. So it functions accordingly. Once it's ready for deployment, we are writing a TypeScript code that would actually deploy the smart contract to the blockchain. This is the state number 5. So we deploy our code to testnet. So the process of deployment of smart contract is very interesting in Ton. What makes it so interesting? As you could see from the previous lessons, we are able to calculate the address that smart contracts will have before we even deploy it to the network. So it is called deterministic. To make this, we need to know the initial state of data for the contract and its actual code. So once we know the address, we are sending a message with initial state and code to this address. So it's that simple. So we are using internal messages or external messages, it doesn't matter. And our deploy script would be simply calculating address, sending a message with initial state and code to this address. You might have noticed that by sending messages, we have to spend some actual money. So we don't want to spend lots of real money while deploying and testing our contract on chain. And this is why we have a copy of the real network that is used only for test purposes. It's free to get coins that are valid on this network. And we call this network testnet. Before our contract is fully ready for production, we will only deploy it to the testnet. And finally, stage number 6, the launch. We deploy our code to the mainnet. Deploying the smart contract to the mainnet is pretty much the same as it would be on testnet, but we are deploying our contract by sending messages with the real Ton coins. Our messages get on the main blockchain, and our contract is available for all the Ton users. It is a very interesting process. Sometimes it's hard to find answers, but I encourage you to not give up. And through this path of this chapter, we will make sure that you have following things. So you have your local laboratory with a full cycle for creating and launching your smart contracts. You will understand the basics of coding of fancy contract. You know where to search for the answer once your contract requires more than we cover in this example. You might be asking yourself, is there any standard local setups environments for writing, testing, and deploying smart contracts? And that's actually a good question. Ton has a rapidly growing set of programming tools, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel, to create your own custom local setup. And there's a great one that's worth mentioning, and it's maintained by Ton Tech team, officially supported by Ton Foundation. It's called Blueprint. You can use it as simple as running a local command, for example, npm create ton. And this will generate a new project for you with code for all the phases that we described above. And you can read more about it in the Blueprint's documentation. But in the scope of this course, we are still going to create custom one, for the sake of your deeper understanding of how this whole process is working under the hood. So enjoy, let's get to it.